Hello, everyone. It's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So, guys, I have with me Garland Nixon himself from Fault Lines, Sputnik Radio. We were on the show this morning. Garland, please tell the show hello.
Hello, everyone.
So, when on the show this morning, we ended up on a topic dealing with William Browder. Now, I didn't know what this was, and then just as a reference, so people would understand what we're talking about. When during the Helsinki summit, Donald Trump standing beside Vladimir Putin brings up Browder, saying that he had funneled like hundreds of $millions into the Hillary Clinton's campaign. Now, everybody else looked at this and just kind of like shrugged, like, meh. Now, and that's a big shrug, because if that's true, that's a big deal. Now, I don't know much about this case. So, Garland, I am going to give it to you to, if you can, explain just the basic details of kind of an outline of what this is and what is going on and why this is a big deal.
Great. So this is about the Magnitsky Act. Most people first started hearing about it when they heard about the infamous Trump Tower meeting. And the Russian lawyer, as she's been called many times, her name is Natalia Veselnitskaya, who I have interviewed personally. I have personally interviewed her on the air, over Skype with a Russian interpreter. So I found out a lot about what happened at that Trump Tower meeting. I'm intimately familiar with it. So here's the story on the Magnitsky Act, Bill Browder, and why it's important. The reason it's important is because the Bill Browder story, many people believe this is what started, this is kind of was the opening salvo for this, second edition of the Cold War, because it started around 2011, 2012. So let me give you the story. Most people don't know this. In 1990, 91, the Soviet Union collapsed. When the Soviet Union collapsed, they decided to switch from a communist country to a market-based economy, right? From a state capitalism, some call it, but a state-owned economy to a market-based economy. And when they did that, here's what happened. There was a guy named Boris Yeltsin who was in charge of who was running the country, and he was, some would say, a puppet for the West. So what did he do?
He was a drunkard.
Right.
He was a drunkard.
Look this up, an article, The Harvard Boys Go to Russia. So what happens? Larry Summers and a bunch of guys from Harvard go to Russia to ostensibly change the economy over. Most people don't know that. The American Wall Street people went to Russia to change it from the Soviet Union state-owned economy to a market-based economy, and they did something they called shock therapy. Well, ultimately, when people look back, it was all shock and no therapy. So basically, here's what they did. A bunch of hedge fund managers and a bunch of investors, private equity investors, etc., they went to Russia and they looted it. They absolutely looted it. They bought things worth hundreds of millions of dollars for a couple $1,000s. They ripped the economy so bad that the 1990s it was referred to in Russia as the lost decade. It was about twice as bad, maybe a little bit more than twice as bad as the crash of 1929. Millions literally starved to death. Most people don't know that. So at that time, one of those people who did that was a man named Bill Browder. He was one of the people that went to Russia to seek his fortune by looting the Russian economy. Bill Browder was an American. His father was Earl Browder, who was the head of the Communist Party back in the 50s in the United States. That's how he had connections in Russia. So Bill Browder renounced his citizenship as an American so as not to have to pay taxes, and became a British citizen. So he goes there and he gets involved with various shenanigans. He's buying companies. He's using shell companies in Cyprus. So basically what Bill Browder's doing is he's buying companies at pennies on the dollar, making a fortune, and using shell companies in Cyprus to hide the money. Right? And we all know that's what a lot of billionaires do. But if you get caught, you get caught, right? Billionaires do that stuff all the time. They use these shell companies. They hired the money so as not to pay taxes. Bill Browder did a number of things. One of the things that he also did was one of his shell companies that had no employees, right? Had no employees. In that area of Russia, they had a special program like they do here that said if you have a company that hires people who are disabled, you can get tax breaks. Well, they filed that they hired a bunch of disabled people, but they didn't have any employees at all. So it was just another tax fraud. So Bill Browder did all of this tax fraud stuff. Ultimately, he got caught, and he had a company called Firestone and Duncan that was working on setting these things up for him, setting up the shell company, etc. And one of their accountants was a guy named Sergei Magnitsky, who worked with Bill Browder from way back. Okay. Ultimately, Bill Browder gets caught. It all comes down on him. The Russian government starts investigating, and they find out, hey, this guy is a tax fraud. All right. As they did with many people at that time, because they were trying to catch up with the people who had been ripping them off throughout the 1990s. Bill Browder's one of them.
Because there were some Americans that went to prison for this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So a bunch of people went to prison. They went and looted the country, and those thought that they could go to jail, that they could prosecute. They did. So at any rate,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
So they're investigating Bill Browder. So eventually, around 2005, Bill Browder's not in the country, and he finds out that he's barred from coming. They took his visa. They took it. They stopped his ability to come into the country because he was, going in there They didn't want him to go in, get any more of his money, and get it out. Yeah. So eventually, they end up arresting this accountant, Sergei Magnitsky, and interviewing him, etc. And eventually, what happened was Sergei Magnitsky and Bill Browder were both charged with tax evasion. Sergei Magnitsky was convicted and sent to jail. Bill Browder was also convicted in absentia because he wasn't there, so he couldn't go to jail. Bill Browder's out of the country. So here's what happens. Here's the gist of all of this. Bill Browder cooks up a story, right, to explain everything. It's all a lie. And he says that because eventually what happened with Sergei Magnitsky, he was in prison. Well, Russian prisons, as in many countries, are not
the sexiest places in the world. Yeah.
A number of people die in Russian prisons every year. You get into a lot of countries, the prisons ain't good. Russians one of them. So Sergei Magnitsky eventually died. He dies in prison. So at any rate, Bill Browder cooks up this fable, and he says he didn't have any idea why they stopped him from going in the country. He knew why. He then says they didn't start investigating him until like 2006. And when they did, 2006, 2007, and he says, and when they did, he went out and hired the smartest lawyer in Moscow, the smartest lawyer in Russia, a guy named Sergei Magnitsky, who was rumored never to have lost a case. Okay, and we're keeping in mind, Bill Browder writes this book about this whole thing, allegedly. So he cooks up this fable, and it involves him and Magnitsky. And then in this story, he claims the reason the Russians came after him was because he was fighting corruption. He was a corruption fighter, and Putin came after him because he was fighting corruption. Now, what Bill Browder leaves out is he was one of Putin's biggest fans. There are many quotes in the New York Times of him saying positive things about Putin. He's known as a big Putin fan until they investigated him and found out that he was a tax fraud, and then suddenly he was Putin's biggest enemy, of course. So he cooks up this story about Magnitsky being a lawyer, and he hired him. And this is where it gets really weird, because he starts getting assistance from the outside. He starts getting assistance from other countries. And that's why many people believe that Bill Browder has connections to the intelligence community. One of the things to keep in mind here is this. Bill Browder's business partner, one of his business partners was a guy named Edmund Safra, who owned a bank. Edmund Safra was a guy who was known to be have a bank that was basically the money bank for like the CIA when they did the Iran-Contra, when they were doing a lot of things in the shadows. In the shadows in South America. Edmund Safra was the dark money bank guy behind that. In fact, if you want to learn about him, here's another article. That's why I say, if people don't have to believe me, I will always give you stuff to look up that I've researched. There's another article called The Money Plane to tell you how crooked they were and what they were doing. William Safra, every week or so during the 1990s when this was going on, was sending a plane from New York. I think it was a 747. Listen to this. With $40 billion in cash.
Are you serious? $40 billion
cash to Russia. Because needless to say, when you're doing shiesty stuff with money, you really can't do it above board. Wow. Not that, think about this. Can you get your hands on that kind of cash without going through the Federal Reserve and the federal bank, without the feds knowing it? But
so I see what you mean. So you're saying that there was some help, something else. It wasn't just him. There had to be something else essentially.
so this is Bill Browder's business partner, a guy who was the dark money for Intel. Now, this guy dies a mysterious death. You know how that happens in that community. A mysterious death and you die to the Intel community. That's not hard to believe. Anyway, at any rate, so when him and Browder go their separate ways, Bill Browder now he gets a new partner, HSBC Bank. Well, here's what I find interesting. Edmund Safra is alleged to have been the dark money man for Intel in South America, right? HSBC Bank, Bill Browder's new partner, and at that time, got in trouble and had like $1 billion fine because they were money laundering for the Mexican drug cartels. Same area, same crookedness going on. So at any rate, so what happens? Around 2011, 2012, the Russians are trying to get Bill Browder, extradited back to Russia. He's been sentenced to
because at this point they know he's guilty, or at the very least they have some kind of investigation.
So he cooks up this story and decides he's going to go around the world claiming that he's a fighter for justice, that he fought corruption in Russia, and now he's fighting for poor Sergei Magnitsky, who died in prison. He's got to make things good. So he says, we've got to have the Magnitsky Act. Now, conveniently, the Magnitsky Act, what does the Magnitsky Act do? It names a number of Russians and basically says they can't travel to the West. Conveniently, these are also the people who, if they came to the West, could testify that Bill Browder was crooked.
Wow, are you serious?
Let's make sure those people never leave Russia, so they can't come tell everybody. You know what I mean? So they can't come rat on me. So
yeah.
Imagine if I had robbed a bank and I came up with a law. What do you want? Well, all the witnesses that saw me rob a bank, yeah, I don't ever want them to be able to testify. Fairly obvious what was going on here. So he gets some people who have shady backgrounds regarding the Intel community. And they go to a John McCain, they go to a Ben Cardin, and they get this thing pushed through the US Congress, and they pass this Magnitsky Act. So the Magnitsky Act is a law that was passed based on an absolute lie. And here's what's interesting about it. This is not a complicated lie that's hard to figure out. Okay, Bill Browder, in 2015, Bill Browder was involved in a lawsuit that he pushed for against a Russian company, right? Prevazon Holdings. He pushed for this lawsuit. He got the U.S. government to go after this Russian company, right? So okay, great. You want the U.S. to go after this Russian company. So the Russian company says, okay, we want to depose Bill Browder. Remember, he's the one that started this lawsuit, right?
Right.
So they said, we're going to depose Bill Browder. We want him to come in and talk. They start trying to serve him with a summons so they can come in and he can talk he can be deposed for the lawsuit that he started, right?
Right.
He disappears. He runs. There's actual video on YouTube of Bill Browder running. Bill Browder was on Comedy Central on some show talking about, the usual Putin stuff, right? When he came out, there were people waiting to serve him with the papers so he could come in and be deposed for the lawsuit that he started, right? Bill Browder, the guy comes after him, he runs. The guy's chasing Bill Browder down the street, and he runs through the limo, runs up the street because he does not want to be served. Think about this.
That is hilarious.
He deposed in the lawsuit that he started. Why? Because Bill Browder cannot stand to be put under oath. Well, eventually they finally catch up with it. They finally serve him. Bill Browder gets under oath, and that's where things go bad for him. They start asking him questions. And what's interesting about Bill is this. You'll see him on Fox, MSNBC, CNN, and they'll ask Bill Browder questions. Oh, Putin did this, but Magnitsky, I'm standing up for him, right? Standing up for Magnitsky. But when you see him under oath, he looks like a scared mouse. They're like, Bill Browder's like, he's looking around, his eyes are darting, his words are fumbling. And here's the funniest part. So Bill Browder's shiesty fable, Sergei Magnitsky is a lawyer. And as Bill Browder said, he hired him in 2007, a lawyer who is rumored never to have lost a case. So they ask Bill Browder, they say, Sergei Magnitsky, you've said on many occasions that he's a lawyer. He says, yes. Did Bill Browder, to your knowledge, did Bill Browder ever go to law school? Bill Browder says no. He said,
so he admits it.
Yeah, he said, does he have a law degree? No. So he's a lawyer. Bill Browder says, he's my lawyer. But he never got a law degree and he never went to law school. Correct. So when put under oath, and he had to tell the truth, he admitted. Now you tell me, what kind of lawyer never went to law school and doesn't have a law degree? Well, I can say one thing Bill told the truth about when he said the guy was rumored never to have lost a case. Well,
right. I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking the same.
So Bill Browder,
yeah, he technically never lost a case because he never tried.
So he's multiple lies in his deposition. So ultimately, what happened with the Trump Tower meeting was this: the Russian attorney, Natalia Veselnitskaya, she was working for representing the company that Bill Browder had the lawsuit brought against, Prevezon Holdings, and she had been researching Bill Browder for years. And one of the things that came out was Bill Browder claims that 2006, 2007, somewhere in that, when he found out that he was being investigated, but he admitted in the deposition that the investigation was going on like 2002, 2003.
Yeah, years before.
He admits
so
that.
He knew.
In 2006, 2007, he claims he went out and hired Sergei Magnitsky. Under oath, he admits that Magnitsky was working for him back in 2002. And keep in mind, the company that was handling his shell companies was Prevezon Holdings, and Magnitsky worked for Prevezon Holdings as an accountant. So tell me, excuse me, I said Prevezon Holdings, Firestone Duncan. That was the company that had been doing Bill Browder's accounting stuff. Firestone Duncan. Magnitsky worked for them as an accountant. He always worked for them as an accountant. That's what he did. Under oath, Bill Browder admits the guy was back in 2002. Yeah, he was working. But keep in mind the other thing. He had gone before Congress and told this fable about Bill Browder being a lawyer and all of that stuff. So he's perjured himself. He's lied before Congress.
Lied before Congress.
Right. Additionally, what's important about that is two things. Number one, many people believe that the Magnitsky Act, so Bill Browder got it passed in the US, got the Magnitsky Act passed in Canada, and he's going around the world to all of these countries trying to get the Magnitsky Act passed, which I would imagine you wouldn't want those people to come to any country to be able to tell them. You want to kind of keep them lower. So he's going around there as some so-called, worker of good deeds on behalf of the legacy of dear old lawyer / accountant, I guess.
Well, if you look him up, he comes as he's humanitarian. The way they put it is, this humanitarian, this critic of Vladimir Putin, this brimming star.
Here's what's really important. The discussion about the Trump Tower meeting. What was going on there? So what was going on at the Trump Tower meeting was this. Natalia Veselnitskaya, who was representing Prevezon Holdings, she wanted to talk to the Trump people, and she wanted to say to them, Bill Browder's a liar. The Magnitsky Act should be done away with. It's all based on a lie. It's based on a fable. I can give you all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. So they were able to work through this guy, Rob Goldstone, or whatever he was, his name is, in England. And this guy was able to contact the Trump the Trump people, right? And to set up this meeting. And Rob Goldstone admitted he was a PR guy. And he said, we've got dirt on Hillary. Well, he admitted later, I'm a PR guy. Basically, you say whatever you can to get the meeting. I knew if I said I got dirt on Hillary, I get the meeting. I was being paid to get the meeting. I said what I need to do to get the meeting. Right. When Natalia gets there, she's like, basically, well, I don't have anything on Hillary. I ain't got nothing. It was never about dirt on Hillary Clinton. Now she says, let me tell you about Magnitsky. So the meeting in the Trump Tower meeting was Natalia Veselnitskaya was there to tell them about the Bill Browder fable, so that when Trump took office, the plan was he'll know the truth, he'll do away with the Magnitsky Act. So now the media is totally ignoring all of that because they can't have us talk about the Magnitsky Act. Now, another thing that's interesting is right now, because things are starting to fall apart for Bill Browder, there's a guy, Bill Browder's been going around spinning his fables, calling people Russian bots, Russian puppets, Kremlin puppets, lovers of Putin,
That's what I was about to say. It's not just ignoring. I mean, they've been on somewhat of an offensive with this. Well, anything that you look up with Browder, if you do a search in Google, the first pages or two is essentially these glowing tributes to Bill Browder.
Right now, yeah, Browder's got big problems, not the least of which being that people like me and you and Lee and other people, Alex Trainer, et cetera, I'll talk about that in a little bit, are out there exposing him. But there is a guy now that Bill Browder was calling a Russian intelligence guy, referred to as a Russian intelligence agent, that was at the meeting, right? Mm-hmm. He's suing Bill Browder now. He's not a Russian intelligence agent, but Bill Browder runs fast and loose with the truth. So he just figured, yeah, I'll call this guy a Russian intelligence agent because it looks good, or for whatever reason. The guy is suing him for defamation. So guess what's going to happen now to Bill Browder? He's going to be running again when somebody's trying to serve him. You know
what's funny? I pulled that clip up, by the way.
Oh, isn't it hilarious?
It's right here. It's like 1 minute and 23 seconds. You want me to show my audience? Let me show my audience.
Show the audience. What happens? Keep in mind, audience, Bill Browder was the impetus for this case against Prevezon Holdings. So needless to say, when the case started, I would think he would want to be deposed. He would want to speak on it. Look at what happens to Bill Browder when they say, okay, here's the papers to serve you, Bill Browder. Let's take a look.
Let's see. All right. And let's present it to everyone. All right. Here we go.
That's Bill, okay, getting in the limo. Look, there's Bill running.
He's running down the street.
Bill breaks, man. He's picking him up and putting him down, buddy. It looks like Usain Bolt there when they tried to serve him.
It's hilarious. You just see these footsteps as he's running away.
Exactly. And they're just trying to serve. He was the one who brought the case. And they like, hey, we want to serve you, United States District Court. Bill Browder he looks like a wideout, man. I'm telling you right now, Deion Sanders couldn't cover Bill Browder in that street.
He hauled ass. He's like, we're here to serve you for something.
Whoa!
So
that's Bill Browder.
That is hilarious. Why are you running down the street like a maniac?
Your case, Bill Browder. Now, furthermore, when they finally deposed Bill Browder, he's caught in multiple lies. And at one point during the deposition, they asked Bill Browder, who brought the case, who went to the U.S. district, who went to the U.S. attorney to bring the case, and he says, I did. Then later on, when they ask him, he says, I don't know how the case got started. This is in the same deposition. He goes, his case, he was the one who was behind the case. Says later on, he doesn't know how it happened.
You know what's wild about this? The Magnitsky Act, I would wager that the only reason this could take place is if it could only be against Russia.
Right.
It takes a certain amount of denigration from a society. Meaning, think of the Cold War. Think of even now they're bringing up the Russian history and everything else. There's this thing in the public consciousness of the United States with this idea of the Soviet Union and Russia, and it allows a certain amount of we can pin it all on them because they're the boogeyman, they're the bad guy. And in this case, I would wager that if this was any other country, there was no way to get this by because for the most part, the public had to be primed to believe that the person was a goblin and horrible and a monster and everything else, that all of this stuff would be true. They didn't even investigate it. They didn't care about the truth. It didn't matter.
The thing about Bill Browder and the Magnitsky Act. So one would ask oneself, with lies that can be so easily debunked. Okay, I was in law enforcement, I was an investigator, true, but I know investigative journalists, a number who have looked at this and said, my God, this is obviously, lies.
Yeah.
You would say to yourself, well, couldn't the government figure this out? Couldn't the State Department? Couldn't the intel community? Why would they stick their neck out with a guy who's lying? There's been some emails that have been exposed where people in the State Department admitted that they knew it was a lie and said, well, I feel like we're part of a Bill Browder PR machine. That said, like, well, you know what? I think I could come up with a better story than Bill Browder. So here's what we know now. They know he's lying, that they're pushing a story and they know it's untrue. So now you got to ask yourself why. Well, because, my friends, the former CIA friends that I talked to, that I hope you may have met in the office, we discussed this on air. And basically what they said was, keep in mind something. The The CIA lies all the time. It's
Yeah, of course, that's their job.
they're
Their job.
about it.
Some degree lie.
Care if Bill Browder's story is true or false, as long as it fits the narrative. And that's what most Americans don't want to accept. Most Americans want to think, well, the government's telling us the truth, the intel community, they're apathetic about it. If it happens to be true, that's all the better. But if it's not, they don't care. Now, so that's where we are now with the Magnitsky Act. A couple of things have happened that are great, and I will recommend a couple of things for the audience. There's a book, a guy named Alex Craner wrote a book, a guy who's met Bill Browder. He's from Europe. He's worked in Eastern Europe and Russia, and it's called Grand Deception, the Browder hoax. You can find that. It's on Amazon again now. It's called Grand Deception, the Browder Hoax, and it tells you the whole story in the background of Bill Browder's lies. There's another book
down at one point, right? I mean, on Amazon.
Well, originally, what happened? Remember, Bill Browder does. Him and his cronies, they do everything to fight anyone who tries to expose the truth about him. Initially, when Alex put the book out on Amazon, it was on for a couple of days. Somebody saw it and wrote an article on the Huffington Post and put it up on the Huffington Post about it, right? Within days, the article came down off the Huffington Post, the article came down off Amazon, gone. And not only did it come down off Huffington Post used to allow contributors to just write something and upload it straight to the Huffington Post if you were allowed to do that. After this happened, now, and they've been doing that since the beginning of the Huffington Post, right? After this happened, they discontinued that policy, and now everything has to go through an editor just because Bill Browder's truth got out. But meanwhile, in Europe, a guy by the name of, and this is an important story, a guy by the name of Andrei Nekrasov, who is a film, who is a Putin critic. Putin guy. He's born in Russia, born in the Soviet Union, actually. So he believes Bill, and he decides, I'm going to make a documentary called The Magnitsky Act Behind the Scenes. And I'm going to, do it for Bill and push his story, and it's important that it gets out. So he starts doing it. He's an anti-Putin guy who believes and supports Bill Browder, right? He starts doing this. About halfway through, he's doing the investigation, and he's like, well, wait a minute. I believe you, Bill. But this story doesn't add up. And in this documentary, I've seen it, he's interviewing Bill, and Bill's all smiles, and Bill's all a big part of the documentary. Bill's cooperating. So at some point, he brings Bill in and sits down and says, Bill, Mr. Browder, I'm paraphrasing. Yeah. Some problems with your story. The timeline doesn't add up, and he starts bringing out a number of things that make no sense. It's like, well, wait a minute. You said this happened in 2006. But then you admit that back in 2002 that happened, so he starts lining things up, and it's obvious to poor old Bill Browder that the cat's out of the bag, right? So Bill, if you watch this documentary, Bill had been all smiles, working with Guy to make this documentary. Bill starts trembling. He almost falls down, getting up out of his chair, says, you'll have to talk to my lawyers, and runs out of the room.
Did he start running out of the studio again?
Now, how telling is this? That a person who opposed Putin, just like Browder, who suddenly opposed Putin once he got caught, who opposed Putin, right? Who believed Browder, who was actually making a documentary to support Bill Browder's story. Halfway through the documentary, he realized Bill Browder was a liar. He starts questioning Bill Browder. Bill Browder runs out of the room, says, you got to talk to my lawyer.
That's amazing.
He finishes the documentary based on what he has, and it becomes obvious that Bill Browder's lying, right? He starts to show this documentary. Bill Browder starts going to the governments in Europe, in the US, and has it blacklisted and starts going after him. So the documentary can't be shown.
That is so bizarre to me. It seems like this is a lot of influence.
Oh, yeah.
So who is Bill Browder from the standpoint? See, take away this part for the moment.
Right.
Who is Bill Browder in our particular society? In the way, because I don't know who, this is my first time hearing of this guy. Right. So who is he? I mean,
that's the funny thing about it. And that's why there's great speculation that Bill Browder is being propped up by either one or two or both, either the intel community, international intel community, CIA, MI6, Mossad, etc., and or major banks. Because keep in mind, one of the things going on with Bill Browder, what Bill Browder was doing was using shell companies and hiding his money all over the place. around the world so that he didn't have to pay taxes on it, right? And that's something that these HSBC just paid $500 million. The HSBC, they're crooked, the crookedest bank you'll ever find. They're always paying several hundred million or $1 billion for something else they've been caught doing dirty. There's a great documentary. I can't think of the name of it. People can probably search and find it about HSBC, about how crooked that bank is. But the bottom line is that you've got these banks that are like, if people start looking into what Bill Browder was doing with shell companies, and they start looking into, that's the Panama Papers stuff, right? Then they're going to start looking into us, and this is the game we're playing. And we can't have people starting to look into the various banks, the city banks, and all of these companies, because Bill Browder was doing these shell companies out of Cyprus. Mm-hmm. You go to Cyprus, Citibank, all these huge companies have 20, 30, 40, 50 companies in Cyprus, right? So major banks have numerous companies in Cyprus. They're all shell companies, and they all play that game. Do you really think they want people to start looking into Bill Browder and the Cyprus shell company game when they're all doing it? So they have certainly a reason to protect Bill Browder. And as I said, if you look at the history of his business partner, Edmund Safra, with dark money, Bill Browder, and Bill Browder's connection to Safra, then you say the intel people certainly have reason to protect Bill Browder. The problem they have is this, and here's the problem they have. Bill Browder's story is so obviously false, and it is so easily debunked.
It doesn't add up.
Start to get back. And I think Putin at that meeting deliberately screwed Browder, because he knew when I bring up Bill Browder, there's a whole lot of people that know about it. And they're going to be like, well, okay, yeah, Bill Browder's a liar. Well, the funny thing about it was, what did Putin say? Putin said, here's what I'm willing to do. You can send some of your people over here to investigators to interview my people, and I'll send some investigators over there to interview Bill Browder. Now, a bunch of people said, Donald Trump shouldn't be giving up an American citizen, right? Bill Browder ain't an American citizen. He voluntarily gave up his citizenship.
Yeah.
Taxes, for starters. So he's not an American citizen. Further, what Putin said was, interview him. He didn't say, take Bill Browder back to Russia. He said, our investigators go interview him. Well, here's what I'll say. I'm in law enforcement. And what does law enforcement always say to people when they don't want to get searched? They say, hey, if you don't have anything to hide, why not let us search you? Well, you should let me just.
Yeah, I hate that. Yeah, I hate that.
Allow consent search to the police. But if Bill Browder, if he's there to defend goodness and righteousness and stand up for dear poor old Sergei Magnitsky, I would think Bill Browder would welcome the Russian investigators and say, I want that on television, on IMAX, so everybody can watch it.
But what it boils down to is, if he's investigated, he knows he's guilty of sin. I think that's the point that you're trying to make, that ultimately he was able to get out of Russia. He was able to get that money, or a certain amount of money, out of Russia, and was able to get a law passed to prevent people from being able to come to the United States to possibly testify against him for that particular law, all the while going out with this humanitarian thing.
That same Magnitsky Act passed so that they can't go to any of these countries.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
that's so amazing. Wow.
What's amazing though,
and the wild part about this is, media seems to have told one very specific line on the Browder issue, and it's, he's humanitarian, he's a Putin critic. That's it. All to the races.
And so everything that happens, they march Bill Browder out, and Bill Browder calls everybody around a Russian bot, and he pretends to be some kind of a Russian expert. He doesn't even speak Russian, for starters. He's far from a Russian expert. But here's a guy who loved and praised Vladimir Putin. Then he gets investigated for financial crimes, basically tax evasion. He gets caught. Then all of a sudden, he calls himself Putin's #1 critic. And how convenient is that?
Is this because during when the Soviet Union collapsed, one of the deals was, look, don't take advantage of us. When we collapse, don't expand NATO, et cetera, that type of stuff. And the United States promptly took advantage of them and expanded NATO. There were many people during that time who, in their, as their government was being fell apart, being switched over to capitalism. What is that? Thousands of people died.
Millions.
Like Browder was one of those people. Have they been able to go after people in Russia itself for things that are taking place in that regard? Because, like you say, he's not a Russian,
right?
He's not an American. I mean, ultimately, he's whatever he is. I mean, was Russia their laws to go after people who've been breaking the law in that country that wasn't necessarily Russian during that time frame?
Right. And so the bottom, you know, it would be just like if somebody came here and killed somebody, you know what I mean, and violated the law. If somebody comes here, let's say somebody came here and robbed a bank and then they went back to France, we try to get them extradited so we can prosecute them. You know, that's all it was. Bill Browder violated the law there, and he was out of the country. They prosecuted him. They had a trial in absentia. They found him guilty and sentenced him to like 9 or 12 years or something. But the bottom line is the evidence was overwhelming, but a big part of the evidence to me regarding the Magnitsky Act and is the fact that Bill Browder's hits. I mean, I'll put it like this. This is what I don't understand. I could come up with a better lie than that. And you know what I mean? If you're going to lie, man, don't lay something out there that can so easily be taken apart that you're going to look like a fool.
But to his credit,
right,
he is not in prison. And he has, for whatever reason, whatever influence he has one newspaper after the next creating glowing articles about. I swear, do a Google search, you will find one glowing article about him after the next.
Think about this. Think about this. Who can go on Fox, MSNBC, and CNN and have every one of them praise him?
Wow, that's amazing.
He can go on. He can be the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New York Times. There is no Republican, Democrat. There is no ideology when it comes to Bill Browder. Bill Browder is universally praised by every single major media outlet in this country. And you think of anybody else like that? Isn't that awful suspicious?
That is very bizarre. I guess what I'm asking is, what is he? Like, is he a power broker? Is he a money person? You know, in the sense of like, because it would make sense that all of those people would love him to death if he's giving money to all of these people. Right. Like if he's this kind of thing behind the scenes that's putting money in people's pocket. I can see that. What is he? Like I said, I've never come across him. And it's only now that I've heard from a standpoint of Clinton.
So he was a hedge fund manager, and his company was called Hermitage Capital. That was it. And he was a shiesty hedge fund manager in Russia. And keep in mind something. This is what people have to understand: is during the 1990s, when Boris Yeltsin was in charge, there were a lot of Bill Browders. Basically, Yeltsin, who the U.S. loved, and the reason they loved him was because he opened up the country for looting.
He was bunkered,
and because keep in mind what had to happen. You have a communist country where the state owns everything. So let's call it the state, the fishing trawlers. There was a fleet of fishing trawlers that was worth like 42 million. The government owned that, right? So now they got to kind of like auction this stuff off to buyers, right? So all of these people from the US, Britain, Israel, etc., go over there. They got this money and they're like, we're going to figure out a way to buy this stuff for next to nothing and basically buy all of the assets of Russia, loot the country.
Yeah.
Doing that, the value of everything went down. So the people in Russia were starving, basically. And these people were ripping them off. That's why the country loved Yeltsin. That's why in 1996, Boris Yeltsin was going to lose the election.
Yes.
So the Clinton administration put all this money into it, sent all these advisors, and swung and interfered with the election in Russia.
Nobody knows that. Like people, it wows me that nobody knows that. Like with a straight face, you would have people screaming bloody murder, you know, about the election and the loss and everything else, and talk about Vladimir Putin injected himself into the election and ran his finger up the skirt of Lady Liberty and all this other stuff, missing the point that what they're saying is a spearfishing operation. We do this constantly.
Look, in 96, and people can search this online. Just search it. Time Magazine, 1996, Yanks to the Rescue. Search that. It's a cover.
Yes.
Not only did we interfere with the election, it was on the cover of Time Magazine called Yanks to the Rescue. And they had a picture of Boris Yeltsin with American flags beside him. And
you know, what people miss in that
of how Bill Clinton sent these people over there to ensure that Boris Yeltsin helped him. We spent a couple of $1 billion in advisors. Can you imagine if Putin did that here and put that on the cover of the equivalent of Time Magazine in Russia? That's what we did.
But they don't care about that. They don't care. They look at that and they say that's whataboutism. It's while they loved Putin when they thought Putin was going to be another Yeltsin.
Yep.
And Putin became his own man, and Putin was like, well, I believe in a strong Russia and I believe in sovereignty, which means that no, I am not going to have her. And it's suspected that they pushed Yeltsin out because Yeltsin, for the most part, allowed them to loot the country.
Yeah.
That time is fascinating, man. I am amazed that many Americans don't know that. I'm amazed that most Americans don't know that.
Yeah, most Americans have no idea that the 1990s in Russia was referred to as the lost decade. And then people don't understand why Vladimir Putin is popular. I'm not pro or anti-Putin. I'm not Russian. That's their business. But why was he popular? He came in 1999, 2000 to a country. Keep in mind, this is a major country that had collapsed twice in one century. 1917. Right? Russia completely collapsed. 1991, a giant country that completely collapsed twice. So Putin comes in there, and it was basically a free-for-all being looted. He kind of comes with an iron fist and stopped that. Now think about Russia from 1999 to a place where people were literally trapping and eating pigeons in the city. Yep. Because they were starving to death, to Russia today, where people are living a fairly working class life. So, in other words, in Russia, Putin is the FDR of Russia. FDR came in after the crash of 29 and was able to restore the economy to some health over a long period of time. Basically, that's what Vladimir Putin did. Like him or not like him, that's the facts of what happened in Russia. That's why Vladimir Putin is popular. And Vladimir Putin's, his main, if you want to say what's the most important thing to Putin, and that was this, it's national sovereignty, because he felt as though these other countries are coming in and they're raiding our country, they're pillaging, they're taking everything, they're violating our sovereignty. We need a sovereign country where everybody can't come in and take our stuff. So that's the way the people in Russia see it, regardless of
why. I mean, like you said, lost decade. Yeah, you had a situation where they know that the United States involved in stuff. Like you said, it was on the cover of Time magazine. We may be unaware of it. They are not.
Right. Think about this. All this stuff is not secret. There's an article. Everyone look this article up. The Harvard boys go to Russia. Larry Summers, that name was the lead guy. And they went in there. They pillaged the place. And the other one is called The Money Plane. And I think that was the New Yorker that did that. And look at that. And they're pillaging stuff. So what they got to do is bring in cash so they can buy stuff. You know, I'm going to buy $42 million worth of trawlers for $1 million. I need cash right now. You know, I'm going to buy the vodka industry that's worth $1 billion for, you know, $1 million. I need cash right now. So they're bringing in cash so they can, from New York, from the Federal Reserve, so they can loot the place. So the bottom line was, at the time, part of what was going on too was the federal government and the intel community was saying Russia has been our adversary. Now we can take their money, we can own them, we can subjugate them, we can turn it into a vassal state. And they were going in that direction. Along comes Putin, stops that, goes in the other direction. Like him or not, that's what happened. And so the U.S. now, the problem that the U.S. has with Russia is two things. Number one, it's a regional power. Mm-hmm. Number two, that regional power is not under the glove of the United States. That's what we have against Iran. Iran is a regional power that's not under the fist of the United States, and we don't like any regional powers. See, we want to be the #1 power in the world, unipolar world, right? We don't even want regional powers.
Well, the problem is this is not a unipolar world anymore. I mean, ultimately, there was a speech that Vladimir Putin gave. I think he was talking to. It was an interview. And he made this point where he was like, you guys have this problem recognizing sphere of influence. Mm-hmm. Like the idea that you guys can operate in the sphere of influence, but we can't. Right. You know, it's like, what level of fairness is that? Now, if I'm looking at politics in that way, he's right. If it's like, how can one country say we have a certain sphere of influence that we can operate, but we don't believe that another country should be able to have it? And the Tillerson memo makes this very clear that the United States doesn't care about human rights and all this other stuff. That ultimately what we care about is whether or not you're going to side with us. The memo was made very clear. We hit Iran and China on human rights abuses because, essentially they're not our allies.
Saudi Arabia, one of the purveyors of human rights abuses on the planet, is
heads and hands. Yeah,
right. And we ignore that. Why? Because because it's all a lie. The United States does not care about that. All we want is to be able to control the areas, control the regions, control the country. And if it's in fact, the fact of the matter is, historically, for the United States, dictators have been better for our plan.
Well, democracy is messy. It's pain in the ass. I mean,
example was Turkey. When we attacked Iran, and when we attacked Iraq in 2003, we gave Turkey this big, like a $36 billion loan, that they never had to pay back, in return for the prime minister of Turkey saying we can use the Turkey to attack Iraq from the north. Problem was, it had to go to the parliament, and the parliament voted it down, and we couldn't do it. So that's the problem with right, with a democratic country. A democratic country can say no. A dictator is best for us from the perspective of our rulers, is best for them, because all they have to say is, hey, dictator, let us do that. And you slide him $1 billion for his Cayman Islands account, and you got whatever you want to. And that's where we are. And it doesn't work with Putin. See, that's running headlong into Putin. It's running headlong into China, and it's running into countries now that are saying, "No, we're not buying that anymore." And we're struggling to navigate our way around that. And one of the ways we're trying to do that now is to put, tariffs or sanctions or whatever on the entire world. Before you know it, there'll be nobody left for us to do business with.
Everybody. I mean, they apparently we're sanctioning Turkey. Yep. I just heard that today. We're sanctioning Turkey. We were supposed to sanction Europe. Now, Europe is still working with Iran, so it's very possible that even though they may come to some agreement on tariffs, that we still may be sanctioning Europe because Europe is staying with the Iran deal. Mm-hmm. This is clearly not a unipolar world. I mean, if you have to sanction everybody, it means that you have no power in the process. Like sanctions in this way is a heavy-handed way of something that's getting across the point that you have lost control.
One of the things that I would advise people to do is look up something, search for something called the Wolfowitz Doctrine.
Yeah.
Paul Wolfowitz in like 2001 or so talked about the Wolfowitz Doctrine. And he talked about the bottom line is that there should be a unipolar world. We should have all the power, and anyone who can challenge us must be stopped. Not anyone who does, but has the potential militarily, economically. That's why you hear them talking about China. Oh, China's a threat. Well, China is not threatening us. We're continually threatening China. But why is China a, quote, threat? Because China's economy is growing so fast that it's eventually going to be bigger than ours.
You know what's wild about that? China
can never be bigger than us. We've got to rule the world.
China has an interesting philosophy about that. So one of the reasons why China is boosting up its military, there are two parts to this. The United States assumes that just because we spend $700 billion on the military, that we're getting $700 billion bang for our buck. There's no reason to assume that.
Right.
I mean, if from the standpoint of healthcare, we pay 4 times more than everybody else in the sense of healthcare, because there's so much, capitalism, where they're going to take a certain amount off the top. Meaning some of that money, a lot of that money, is just going into people's pockets. It's not going into real material things. So the amount of money that those countries spend on their military may be to some degree commensurate with the real potential that we get out of ours, especially if they're spending that money in ways that are more effective.
Here's what's important about this. And okay, so we build a ship that costs, a area craft carrier, let's say it costs $3, $4, $5 billion to build, right? Mm-hmm. So Russia, China, they're like, well, we can't spend that much. So you know what they do? They build a missile for a couple $1 million that'll take it out.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So now the Russians have these anti-ship missiles that are hypersonic.
Hypersonic missiles. I saw that.
Miles an hour. And that if you look up the various missiles they have, that our own Defense Department admits we have no defense for these missiles because they're so fast. That even if they didn't have a warhead in them, which they do, the kinetic energy
itself will be enough. Yeah.
Tear the ship apart. So what they do is they say, okay, I can't build a $5 billion ship, so I'll build a $5 million missile that'll take that $5 billion ship out. And so you're right in a way that we forced them to take an alternate strategy. They build. They say, well, we need missiles that'll take out satellites. We need killer satellites. So the U.S. has all of this stuff that if we get in a war with them, we blow their satellites up, and now all of that GPS tracking for the Tomahawk missiles doesn't work. So they had to take a more strategic view of military, which means it's funny. It's just as you said, they get more bang for their buck. Additionally, think about this: they tend to do defensive. Russia spent last year, I think, $69 billion. We spent.
Yeah, that's it. The amount of money that we upped our budget was more than what they spent on their entire military.
That's what they did this year. They spent less. They went down to like $61 billion. They're spending their money on people. Times are tight for them. And so they're tightening their belt, but they're taking money from their military. Why? Because their military is a defensive military generally. You know what I mean? It's a lot cheaper to build a defensive
offensive capacity. Yeah. There's another part to that too. China was looking at, I can't think of the name of the term, but essentially this idea of it's kind of like an acknowledgement of who's in charge.
Right.
When there is a situation where one side is potential challenge for the other side, that there is this kind of battle for hegemonic viewpoint, in which case one side almost gobbles up the other. Either one side wins or one side loses. Right. I can't think of the name of it. It's something like something trap. What China says, the way that you get above that trap is by increasing your military so rapidly up into the point where you can essentially be a match where the other economies can't necessarily crush you. Right. Meaning that just by virtue of the way that we operate, they feel that they need to expand their military in order to not necessarily be taken down. Meaning they want to be able to stand up for themselves in regards to the way they go about their affairs. And they feel like they need to boost themselves up militarily in order to do that. I thought this is terrifying because, believe it or not, that was essentially the surroundings of World War I, where all of these countries created alignments. So we have today NATO. During that time, they had the alignment where you had all of these powers who are, again, in these alignments. It's like we never learned. And even though the other side is the axis, well, you have China, Russia, Iran, Syria, North Korea, potentially even Turkey. You have another block, meaning you have that same dynamic of one side versus another side. And you have flashpoints that are taking place in countries like Syria, and potentially even Israel. Right. This is terrifying. This is terrifying. What they're doing is terrifying.
And it's a result of our absurd policies, of the absurdity of the whole, America's the greatest country, and we're smarter and better than everyone, and that the world is a totem pole, and we're at the top of the totem pole, and everyone is behind us. So you have the Russias and the Chinas of the world, and Russia and China, basically their thing is, look, no one has to be the supreme country. We can all operate within our own sphere. We can all operate. Certainly, we're all looking out for our best interest, and we'll all make it together. Where the U.S. is saying, no, we are top dog, and everyone has to be subservient to us. So what you also have now is, in addition to militarily, you have all of these countries now that are starting to build economic alliances.
Yes.
One of the things people don't realize, Russia is shedding just about all of their dollars, and guess what they're replacing it with? Gold. They're buying gold. They're getting rid of
gold,
and they're buying gold.
China is talking about potentially, even if the dollar leaves as a reserve currency, I suspect that we will take the place of Britain in the same way that Britain kind of unraveled itself once the pound no longer became the reserve currency. They're talking about having gold-backed currency. Like China is literally talking about changing the dollar as a reserve currency. Part of this has to do with us pushing. Like, it's one of those things of, if you don't insist too much upon somebody, they may allow something to prosper.
Right.
But the moment that you become overbearing, somebody's like, oh God, this has become enough. We need to do something about this. Meaning,
that's the interesting thing about Trump. What America has been doing, what Trump is doing now is what America has been doing at a lower degree, kind of under the table with a smile on their face.
Yeah.
Hegemonic, we've been pushing people around, but we've been doing it smiling. Acting like the nice guys, claiming, that we're doing it in the best interest of everybody, blah, blah, blah. Trump comes out and he takes any veneer of benevolence off.
It's gone. It's gone. We're the boss. I don't see why
we're America. We can do what we want, and you can't stop us. And everybody is waking up. The rest of the world is waking up, saying, we kind of knew what you were doing, but gee,
I think realized that they were, for all intents and purposes, a vassal state.
Right. And the countries were like, it was uncomfortable, but it wasn't untenable. We could live with it. It wasn't comfortable. Everybody knew what you were doing. We didn't like it, but we could live with it. Now, under Trumpism, it has become so obvious, and now he's
rubbing our face in it.
Around, that it's unbearable, and the countries are like, okay, we got to start working together to deal with this. So you can look. I believe in the next 5 to 10 years, we're in a world of trouble. They are looking to replace the dollar in as the petrodollar, to get rid of that, so that people are selling oil in the yuan, which is out there. They're really looking to get rid of us as a reserve currency worldwide. People are going to be unloading dollars, and I think they realize, because remember, the same thing happened to Japan in 1980 when the yen crashed in 1980. The Japan economy crashed. They know they don't have to attack us. They know they don't have to blow us up. They know all they got to do is blow the dollar up. And I would suspect right now that's what they're all plotting to do. And if they're all plotting to do it, they will be successful.
If that dollar unravels, this will be a hellscape ride down, because you're going to have a population that is completely incapable in seeing itself in any real world terms. We're $20 trillion in debt. What the hell are we doing? And you know, this is not a situation where, you know, everyone has health care, everyone goes to school. You know, we have maglevs going from California to New York that get you there in like a minute. You know, none of that stuff is true. Our society is falling apart, and we're still doing this master of the universe thing. It's nonsense.
Here's the other thing to keep in mind. 2008, there was a crash, and that's why we're in a difficult period. There was a crash in 2008, and a lot of people lost a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And people are still of a mind that it's going to come back. You know what I mean? People are still like, okay, who can we elect that's going to bring us back? You know, I'm going to bring the jobs back to the Rust Belt. I'm going to bring this back. I'm going to bring that. And people voted. A lot of people thought, okay, somebody can bring it back. That's good. They're just like, it's like people who like, okay, if my team my football team is a bad team, and I believe in the magic coach. All we got to get is the right coach. They're like, hey, guess what? We just hired Bill Walsh. Oh my God, we're going to win the Super Bowl. No, you have a bad organization. You have no players. You haven't drafted a decent player in 5 years. Nobody can fix it for you at this point.
Not to mention your players are getting brain trauma by banging into each other. Like it's dysfunctional all the way through.
And so people are like, well, if we elect Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or whoever, it's going to fix it all. The problem is one person can't fix it because it's systemic.
Yeah.
It's a systemic problem. It's that we have a bunch of banks that are making money that don't produce anything. They extract from the economy. They don't put into the economy. Mm-hmm. And so we have a system that it can't be fixed. And at some point, and it's slowly happening, people are going to vote for a Trump in 2020. Who knows who? They'll vote for whoever, right? And at some point, people will wake up and say, well, it's been 15 years. It's been 20 years since the crash. It ain't coming back.
Yeah.
At some point, they'll wake up and realize that it's not that it isn't coming back. It already came back. The problem is when it came back, it all went to the top 1%.
Do you think? See, I'm always torn by this because I got to be honest. I don't quite understand why people aren't more rabid. Like, you look at your society and you say to yourself, how on earth is that one guy with $150 billion and the rest of the society is struggling? Like, and when I say that, I mean that in real terms. Like, what, 60% of society doesn't have $500 in the bank? Like, if there was an emergency, I consider that struggling. I mean, I like, if you don't have $500 in the bank, you're poor.
Exactly.
And I'm saying that to say all of these bills that people have, whether college, education, healthcare, all these things, those are things that they need to have. Whether they realize it or not, their society can be different. I don't understand why people don't have this base level society in their heads of, at the very least, we should all have healthcare, education, and somewhere to stay and something to eat. Just as a bare minimum as human beings.
People know this, but here's what's going on.
I don't think they know that.
How to fix it. And they're trying to figure out how to fix it from a screwed up paradigm, from a red team versus blue team paradigm. You know what I mean? So they're trying to figure out how to fix this, and they're looking to the disease. They're looking to the people who created this problem for the cure. Yeah. They ain't the cure. Donald Trump ain't the cure. Hillary Clinton ain't the cure. They're the disease. So people are looking to the disease for a cure, saying, how's Donald Trump going to fix it? Well, he's a billionaire that started companies, went bankrupt, got more money, flew all over the world making more money. Hillary Clinton, a corrupt politician, came into politics with nothing, and now she's worth $100 million. Those people ain't fixing it. Nancy Pelosi worth $50 to $100 million.
$100 million Nancy Pelosi.
Mitch McConnell worth $20 million. Congress is the elite class. they ain't fixing it. And so you have all these people that are still brainwashed enough, still confused enough to believe that their team, oh, I'm a Republican, they're going to fix it. We've got to support the Democrats. They're going to fix it. They are the system that caused it. And at some point, I think there are some people, particularly millennials, who are waking up saying, oh, screw this. I'd vote for debt ICE before I vote for one of these clowns.
Yeah, that's called debt. That's called like that revolutionary fire brought about by a shitty situation. And they should be pissed off. Like their forefathers screwed them over royally. Like this idea of, hey, you want an education? Yeah, this education is your gateway to success. Great, $50,000.
Right.
You know, like a man in the desert. You want this water? $1,000 for this one, 8 ounces of water. But that's what it's like. I mean, for the most part, drug companies, everything else, and they would say, oh, they're just being good capitalists, screwing over, the youthful generation in this country. That we do things that are so horrendous to each other in this case. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
I don't know how people. Propaganda, yes, I understand it, but something that you said, the perspective that people like Chuck Todd, Jake Tapper, the people on CNN, MSNBC, all of those people that you're looking at, and the perspective that you're calling objective, are millionaires. All of those people are part of the 1%. Like the perspective that they're giving you is literally, this is the perspective of the 1%. You can flip through any channel and all of us are going to be talking about similar things that in no way relate to your real life.
Think about this. On MSNBC, the #1 show is Rachel Maddow, who is a frothing
conspiracy theory.
When I turned it on, I'm like, she must have been poisoned by Novichok. She's something about Russia every week, right? Total madness.
She got debunked by Washington Post the other day.
Right. Then you go to Fox. And you got the same thing, Hannity, the #1 show there, who's the same thing, blind red meat partisanship.
Yeah.
And you see where the problem is. You see they're corralling people into a nice little inside a nice little fence in a nice little barn and keeping them very tightly in there with the door closed. Look, you're a Republican, you're a conservative. Hey, you're a Democrat. You're a liberal. We are your shepherds. Listen to us. We'll tell you. And those guys over there, everything would be fine if it wasn't for the Republicans. Meanwhile, Hannity's saying, look, guys, if it wasn't for the Democrats over there, everything would be bad. Or you get Trump that comes along. He says, look, there's nothing wrong with the system. We've got these, the Chinese and the Europeans. Those people over there, they're taking
those damn immigrants, those Mexicans who are rapists and drug dealers. Who 1 or 2 are nice.
Yeah, but they're the problem. Don't look at the elite ruling class like people like me who've taken advantage of the system to become a billionaire. Don't look at the people I've surrounded myself with, the billionaires who've extracted all your money out of the system. No. It's not us. It's those people over there. And here's what they leave out. Because our system, through multiple tax cuts for the billionaires and through multiple financial changes that make sure that all of the financial breaks go to the wealthy and to the corporations. For that reason, even if, let's just say for the sake of argument, Trump was completely successful and he was able to change the trade laws so that there was no more trade deficit. Get rid of all of the undocumented immigrants. He was able to do all the things that he wanted to do and restore all this money coming back into the United States. What did we learn from the recovery? What we learned is this: if he were successful and all that money were to come back into the United States, it would all go to the top 1%.
Yeah. All the money before.
None of us would get it. None of it would get in our hands. Just like the recovery, all 97% of the money in the recovery went to the top 1%. So even if he gets done what he says he wants to do, all that money is still going to go to the top 1%. We have a fundamental flaw in the system. And that's why all of this prattle about what money's going to do. Think about, you had a giant tax cut. You've had giant tax cuts for the rich under Reagan, giant tax cuts for the rich, more giant tax cuts for the rich under Bush, right? Obama, who were only supposed to
sign them into law, 80%.
Obama signs them into permanency.
Yeah.
Here comes Trump with the biggest tax cut of all for the rich. Can you imagine how your life would be? And my life would be if people in our, I don't even know what you make, but people in our tax range, probably neither one of us is super rich. If people in our tax range had got gigantic tax cuts 3 times in a row, we'd be practically paying nothing in taxes.
I mean, think about all of that money. I mean, you're talking about trillions of dollars. Think if that money was put into the bellies of people who needed it, or the houses of somebody who needed it, or like, that is so much money, and you're giving it to people who don't even know that it's in their account. Like, to them, it's, oh, there's another number. Nice. That's quaint.
Did you ever?
I don't even know. Like, it's not, it's like, to them, it may be a mental number, but in real world terms, you're talking about things that actually affect people's lives, their access to the things that they need. Now, I thought this argument is always amazing to me. Like the argument, the Amazon thing in Seattle, where Amazon fights a head tax. Now, these guys are making millions of dollars, and they're making this money off of the society itself, meaning those companies that are making millions and millions, they breathe the air, they use police force, they use the fire department, they use all of these things that make up a society. They would like to go to Starbucks to get the coffee from the person. That person is not trying to steal money out their pocket because they're in this hellscape where they need stuff. You know, they're able to walk across the street that are paved. They're in a society. They should pay for the society. Now, the government itself said, we have a homeless population problem. We need to do something about that problem. And the city gets fought by the companies themselves, where the companies attack the city in order to change the law.
And remember, you're talking about companies. You're not talking about, you know, your local grocery store fight.
No. It's multi-million-dollar companies.
Boeing, Starbucks, some of the companies in the world don't want to pay a few extra dollars in the city they're in
to make sure that people aren't homeless.
That this world, this multinational conglomerate, the home city, they don't want to pay a few more dollars to help the homeless people in their home city. It's not that they can't afford it. It's just the principle of the thing.
They just don't want to do it. Yeah.
Forget that, man. Are you kidding? One more penny for me. I've got $141 billion. But I ain't going to share none of that with a homeless person.
And this is kind of my point. Like, there needs to be a certain amount of solidarity when companies do that. My feeling is those companies need to be attacked. And it aggravates me, because it's one of those things where the cities and the states all throughout the United States should have a base level that they don't allow them to go beyond, because, you know, this is race to the bottom nonsense, where one company or one state will say, hey, I'll lower my tax rate to this, and another say, I'll lower my tax rate to this, and you have this slow race to the bottom. Then one state would say, look, we will give you the tax dollars of your workers.
Right.
When you come to think about what's taking place here. Like,
you know what's funny thing about it? It's China. It's China. It's like this. Think about it. They leave the U.S. and go to China because they can pay the people $2 a day or whatever the heck, or Vietnam or one of these other countries, Costa Rica, because they can pay them next to nothing, right?
And ship it right back in the States.
So Texas and these other southern states say, hey, we'll set up the laws so our poor workers in our state are in just as bad a shape as the Chinese. You don't have to go to China. You can find poor people and take advantage of the Americans right here. And they're like, that's a good idea if you make it easier for us to take advantage of Americans. Yeah. So they pass all the laws, and instead of the race to the bottom having to go to China, they can go right to a southern state and where there's no union, there's no decent benefits, and they can take advantage of good old Americans instead of having to take advantage of the Chinese.
And you know what? And this is why I focus more so on Democrats, because I got to be honest, these foaming at the mouth, knuckle dragging, gobbling Republicans should not be winning any contest. Right. Like, because what you just said, that argument right there is essentially the bare bones of what's taking place from the standpoint of politics. And are you telling me that a leftist, a real lefty, can't craft an argument to get it across that you are being taken advantage of, you're being had? And I suspect that the reason why a lefty can't craft that argument, if you're a Democrat, is because ultimately to craft that argument, you are some degree going to be attacking the people who are putting money in your pocket, which is not allowed, meaning the only argument you can really craft is one about identity. You can't craft one about economics.
Exactly.
I mean, they lose.
Or foreign policy, because they're pushing right now, they're pushing for war more so than the Republicans.
Yeah. It's
They're
insane.
more aggressive than the Republicans. So I'm with you. I usually go after the Democratic Party more because I know what the Republican Party is. It's a
Yeah,
conservative party. Conservatism is pretty straightforward. The
yeah,
Democratic Party has see. I used to support the party of FDR.
yes,
That's
same.
what I supported. People are using the words democratic socialism. That's nothing but FDR. That's nothing but a New
Classic
Deal.
Democrat.
That's
Yep.
all it is. It's not really democratic. It's a New Deal Democrat. It's it's looking for a healthy balance between government intervention in business and between a free market. It's looking for that healthy balance, right?
Because it's still a capitalist. Like the stuff that these guys are talking about are like Denmark is a capitalist society. It just has a certain amount of government intervention in order to balance out the society. When I think when Ocasio-Cortez or Sanders talk about it, they're talking about those type of capitalist countries. I mean, even though she's calling herself a democratic socialist, what she's describing in her platform, for the most part, is just like a Denmark or
European
Scandinavia.
She's a middle of the road moderate in Europe.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
I mean, most conservative parties in Europe would agree with her on things like, look, you've got countries in Europe that are run by conservatives that have free healthcare,
Germany,
that have free college, that have all of these things that are run by conservatives. The conservatives wouldn't think of getting rid of them because they know
the reason. I mean, it makes sense that if you care about your society, you would do that. I mean, think about it for the moment. If you're really talking about unleashing opportunity in your society, hey, you want to know what does? Allowing any and everybody who wants to go to school for as long as they want to go to school. If you're talking about unleashing opportunity, you're going to say, we're going to make it as easy as possible for the people in our society to be full human beings.
Right.
And by that, I just mean allow them. Look, my emphasis is always on this thing of freedom. And I know the argument is always, well, what does that mean from the standpoint of freedom? I think freedom to some degree has a collective component to it, but ultimately you need the things to be able to live your life. You need to be fully actualized, which means you need this kind of sense of fulfillment, food, clothing, shelter, et cetera, et cetera. Germany supplies a lot of those things because to some degree, I think it at the very least says, we want you to get a running start in your life. We don't want you to suffer in this particular life because your society suffers when the people in that society suffer. Like you're talking about like crime. Like look at our society. We have like gun violence every day. Like there's a homicide. And I was talking to my mom today. And I was like, that's for all intents and purposes, symptoms of a sick society. Wherever that sickness festers, think of somebody with gangrene or with a gaping leg wound. They may cough, they may have nausea, vomiting, headaches, all this stuff. But all those things are just symptoms of a sick society. And we don't pay attention to it.
About the violence in our society, if you really look at it, it is a direct reflection of our foreign policy. How can we have a foreign policy where we go around and attack people and blow people up and kill people and slaughter people by the millions like it's nothing, and then expect that our people at home aren't going to see violence as the first option? We say, well, if we can't work out a deal with this country, we'll attack them. If we can't
openly, we'll brag about it.
And bombing them. Oh, well, you know what? Syria, we have an accusation of a chemical weapons attack. No investigation yet, and the investigation ultimately showed that there was no chemical weapons attack. An accusation, and we bomb them, we attack them.
No proof.
Slaughter people, right? And then we say to the people at home, oh, now you have to be gentle, kind people, loving. Do not act like your government acts internationally.
Yeah.
Act the same way we act internationally. Have a totally different attitude. People don't listen, they watch and learn. I believe while guns is certainly an issue that we need to look at and address, there's no way we're going to fix our violence problem. It's like one of my sisters told me she used to smoke, and she said she stopped smoking. She had a daughter. The daughter was little. Mm-hmm. And she said one day she looked and she saw her daughter had pulled out her daughter was like 2, had pulled out a cigarette out of the pack and stuck it in her mouth and was like,
oh, that was it.
And she said, I'm not smoking anymore.
I'm done.
It's the natural thing to happen. That's what kids do. By the same token, that's the same way your country, we use the metaphor always. Government is family. The founding fathers. We're going to send our sons and daughters overseas. We use the metaphor as government as family all the time. And in some ways, it is somewhat accurate. People watch their government. And why shouldn't they go out and kill people? That's what we do. It seems natural.
It's like, how do you make that argument that is wrong when we do it in a heartbeat? Howard Zinn used to make this argument, the difference between a just cause and a just war. And it was something that he said that I didn't even realize that we did, but he's right. This idea of something happens, we need to punch somebody in the nose. It's almost immediate. Something happens, we need to punch somebody in the nose without asking the question of, well, wait a minute, is that the best thing to do? Should you do that? Is there a better way to do that other than that? Meaning the jump to violence has become so natural that it's almost a normal thing that we do, as opposed to, are there better ways to solve the solution? I mean, is there a better solution?
It's our first option. It is the first option. What are we going to do? Well, we might have to attack them. Well, we might have to blow them up. We might have to attack this country or that country. Now, here's what I always say, too. The first thing we hear is if we say, well, we want free college for everyone, we can't afford it. Well, keep in mind this. We just increased the Pentagon budget by somewhere between $50 and $80 billion a year, right?
On a whim. No debate.
No debate. The studies said that it would cost somewhere between $45 and $67 billion a year for free college for everyone. Yep. We just increased the Pentagon budget by more than it would cost for free college for everyone. So when somebody says we can't afford it, how are we going to pay for it? I always say this. When somebody says to me, we're going to bomb this country, can we afford it? We want to attack this country. How are we going to pay for it? We want some new F-35s. Can we afford it? When people ask that question is when I'm willing to ask how we can afford healthcare and how we can afford college. But as long as nobody's going to ask me how we can afford attacking country X, don't ask me how we can afford giving the taxpayers' money back to them in benefits.
Yeah, agreed. You're preaching to the choir on this one. With Joshua Renshaw, this is hilarious. This guy doesn't sound like a Hillary Clinton supporter, so I'm going to assume he's racist against women and sexist against Black people and financed by Vladimir Putin.
All of the above. I love it. And the other part of it is this, now you've gotten what I'll call a populist, a kind of populist movement going on with people like you and me.
Yeah.
People who are tired of the duopoly, who are like, okay, I see who the Republicans and the Democrats are. And so we look at politics without, hey, I'm a Democrat, so I got to attack Trump or this person or that person, or I got to defend Maxine Waters or whoever because they're a Democrat. We look at it and we evaluate it and we see what we think is right and wrong. And what's funny is people will say, well, this is happening to Trump. And I'll say, I oppose Trump and all of his policies. However, in that particular instance, I agree with Trump. We should have reproach with Russia. Or in that particular instance, now I think what the FBI is doing with Trump probably it looks illegal to me. You're a Trump supporter because their minds have been so brainwashed that they only see two options.
It's one or the other.
Option A, you go with anything against Trump. If it's the FBI, if it's the CIA, if it's a lie. I remember talking to a guy one time and I said, well, I'm very skeptical about Russiagate. He said, wait a minute, it doesn't matter. He says, I see that as a blunt object to beat Trump over the head with.
That's the truth. That's reality.
I don't care whether Russiagate is true or not. I hate Trump, and I don't care if I have to lie, cheat, and steal. I don't care if the people that are telling anything they tell me bad about Trump, I'm ready to believe it.
I'm going to believe it.
I hate Trump. And I'm like, well, then what does that make you?
It's like, they would say a patriot. They was like, well, I'm being a patriot because I'm trying to hold back the night and trying to, stop oblivion itself from taking over the planet. However, they rationalize it to themselves. They will use him. They use whatever they can as a blunt object to hit him. And that's the truth of the matter. That's the honest to God truth. Whether they want to accept that, own that, even mention it to themselves when it's 3 a.m. and it's them and their God, they know that that's more true than not. They use that, whatever they use as a blunt object, the Trump and Russia stuff. And it's an effective blunt object, only to a point. It's effective in the sense of not being able to obfuscate from their own failures, meaning why Trump is in their office in the first place. But it doesn't get them points because the public, for all intents and purposes, doesn't care. The Gallup poll showed that it was like 1%?
Right.
Like when it had a list of items that the public cared about. It was like on page 2 at the very end, you had like Russia.
Dealing with Russia, less than 1%, like 0.09%. The funny thing is, in a way, I think the elites right now see Trump as the best thing that ever happened to them. Because at a time when everything is falling apart, people like you and I want to talk about policy.
Yes.
You don't have to talk. The Democrats, have you heard anything about policy?
They don't want to talk about policy. They don't want to talk about it.
An opportunity to avoid talking about policy and avoid talking about the things because they ain't going to change policy in a way that hurts us, helps us, because it'll hurt their billionaire donors.
Yeah.
So right now, in an odd kind of way, Donald Trump is propping up both parties and the media, in that the Republican Party, the fact of the matter is, even rank and file Republicans despise Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell. If they didn't have Donald Trump, most Republicans hate the leadership of their party.
Yeah.
Democrats have sliced off the
progressive wing,
progressives, and they have no policy. So the only thing they have is we're anti-Trump. Meanwhile, CNN, MSNBC, etc., Fox, 24 hours of either attacking Trump, defending Trump, Russian Trump. If Trump were to disappear into the ether tomorrow, never to be seen again,
they wouldn't know what to do.
Oh, would they?
For the next 2 days, it'd just be a blank page with them just staring in front of the screen all day.
It'd be like in the old days when television went off at midnight and they played the Star. That's all they'd have.
You're telling our age. You're telling our age. Oh, that's hilarious. Let me read one more. Baltazar, Maddow and journalists aren't the 1%. They are the 0.1%.
Yes.
He's right about that.
But so here's what it comes down to. They're part of the elite ruling class. And this elite ruling class includes Congress. It includes the people in the media who are paid so much by the same people that are paying for all the lobbyists, that they're just all one lump. Those people don't want the tax cuts. You make $30,000 a day. You don't want tax cuts for the rich to go away.
No, they don't. And if you notice, the perspective that they take, that they consider to be objective, is essentially the perspective of whatever that millionaire is. It is a very, there's a reason. If Sanders, if you notice, he started going through YouTube in order to try to get his message out because he felt like he couldn't get it out through regular media. That is not something they want to talk about. They don't, poverty and that stuff, no. Donald Trump, yes. We were at a cafeteria one day, my wife and I, and the woman who was at the counter, she was like, God, I wish she would shut up about Trump. And it's not that she loved Trump. It was just, they talk about him constantly. It's incessant.
But now they're all freaked out because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won. And they're like, the Democratic Party is... Here's the funniest thing about that. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I got to say this. Ocasio-Cortez, she's dragging the party too far to the left. We'll lose. We can't do this. And I'm thinking...
They already lost.
Well, a Democratic socialist is bad for the party. It's going to cause the party to fall apart. And the last time I checked, if they had not had kneecapped a certain Democratic socialist, a Democratic socialist would be president of the United States. So don't tell me a Democratic socialist can't win because it can't be in Congress or can't be a governor, because had you not kneecapped a Democratic socialist, he would probably likely be the president of the United States today. So it's not that they're looking at Democratic socialists saying, oh no, darn, they'll mess up the party. It's and then we'll lose because they're already losing. They're like, no, we will have to change this money merry-go-round that we have, where we come in and we pretend to be politicians when we're nothing but shills for the billionaires for a couple years.
That's what it is.
Make plenty of money on the side, and then we leave and they give us a job and we make plenty more money. We don't want to mess up this money train. And these darn Democratic socialists and progressives and all of these
guys are true believers.
We look out for the working class people.
These guys are true believers. The one in Virginia, the guy, they held up a sign over top of his head, the communist sign over his head, because he was arguing for stuff about workers. Right. The Democratic Socialist that's in Virginia, at least.
Right. Yes, the guy that won.
Yeah. So Baltazar, he says, Jinping the Pooh wants to trade in honey-colored dollars. Jinping the Pooh. Oh, that's hilarious.
Creative guy there, huh?
Yes, he is. Oh man, you have no idea. Some of the stuff that he comes up with is amazing.
And they're telling their age, oh my God, socialists, people aren't going to vote for socialists. Bad news, they already voted for a Democratic Socialist. But the other part of it is this. Millennials weren't even born, a lot of them.
And they don't care.
The union fell apart.
What they don't get.
Don't mean a damn thing to them. You know what they hear? They're saying, what are you going to do for me?
That's right there.
When Ocasio-Cortez says, well, how about you deserve free college? How about we deserve to bring the troops home? How about we deserve to be reasonable and fair in our dealings with the Palestinians and the Israelis? And these old fogies are like, she's a Democratic socialist. And these young people are like, those policies sound good to me. I don't care what you call her. You guys can flip out and be triggered by those names. We're voting for her.
Well, and not just that,
Yeah, go
the
ahead.
previous generation screwed them over royally. Like if you're talking about like, think of the amount that these guys have to pay for school. Think of the job opportunities that's available. All of this stuff is just. Don't get me wrong. This is a capitalistic system. So if you can screw over college kids in order to, to get a degree, you do it. If you can raise the price of drugs, you do it.
Right.
But all of that means that their life gets harder.
Right.
Like them just going about their way gets harder. So you can imagine that if you have these kids who have somewhat of a difficult life, they acknowledge and they understand that the generation before them screwed them over. Would they be all that disinclined for a system that sounds a little bit more fair than a rugged system that take advantage of them as is? Like I guess I'm saying it's almost like a certain revolutionary potential built into the system in the way that these guys have been screwed over by this particular system.
Right. It's like this. If you and I are riding in a car and I am the navigator and I got maps out and I'm telling you where to go and I'm giving you directions and you're like, Garland, it's 1 o'clock at night. We're in the middle of a forest. We don't know where we are. We're just about out of gas. There's bears and wolves growling around us. And you still don't know where we are. And I say, but listen to me, I'll get us out of it. You're going to snatch the maps out of us. No more. You're getting us killed and lost. I ain't listening to you. And I think that's what the millennials are doing. They're like, okay, it's like Brexit. They're saying, okay, so let me understand this. The people that screwed us royally are telling us to do X, right? And they're like, yeah, well, we're going to do Y then.
Why?
Because we know we know where the road leads when we listen to you. They get to a point where they're doing the opposite, and I don't know, because I am too to some extent.
Garland, is there anything? One last question. Is there anything else that you want to give the audience? I always ask this of all of my guests because sometimes if it's something that I didn't ask, we didn't bring up, well, somewhere in between. We've been running our mouth for an hour, 30 minutes. So is there anything else that we didn't mention that you would like to say before we end this?
No, I think we hit a lot of stuff, and it's been a lot of fun. And I want to tell people that do what I do, and I watch the Progressive Soapbox every single day. I watch your show every day. I watch Jimmy Dores every day. I listen to George Galloway. I watch George Galloway.
God, I love Galloway, man. I love Galloway.
Watch the Progressive Soapbox every day. Make this one of your staples, and you will learn a lot. That's the advice I have everybody.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate it. And Fault Lines, by the way, I was on earlier today. I know there were a lot of people who were there with me. Fault Lines, Lee Stranahan, Garland Nixon, awesome show. I love going, so definitely tune in to these guys.
Follow me on Twitter. I'm at Garland Nixon. Instagram, Garland.Nixon. Plain old Garland Nixon on Facebook. And you can email me at garlandn at the N as in Nixon, garlandn@gmail.com.
Excellent, excellent. All right, guys. Oh, Wesley. Thank you, Wesley. All right, guys. I'm going to end this here. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. And of course, you guys can always support through Patreon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.